Hi, I'm Mrs. Toner, and we are going to be taking some notes over some vocabulary terms to help us with our math, with our multiplication and division. So what I want you to do is start with your math notebook, have it face up, then you're going to flip it over. Once you flip it over, you're going to open it up to the very back, which many of you probably have a place value chart and maybe a couple of other things toward the back. So I'm going to turn until I have two brand new pages that haven't been used side by side. And I'm going to start over on the left-hand side of the page. So as you start on the left-hand side, I want you to go ahead and head it with today's date of 10/27 and write vocabulary and then multiplication and division. And at this time, if you need to pause your video so that you can keep up, then please pause it. And then you may do that at any time so that you can keep up with what we're doing. All right, so we need to make sure that we understand the different vocabulary terms that we are using as we go through all of this. So I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit, and I want you to skip a couple of lines, and I want you to write the word product. And I want you to think to yourself, what does the term product mean? I will underline it, and then I will highlight it. And then we're going to, again, go ahead and write down the definition for product. And the product is simply the answer of multiplying two or more numbers, which are called factors, or the result of a multiplication problem. So go ahead and copy down the definition. So I've copied down the result answer of multiplying two or more numbers called factors. So make sure, notice how I've indented here so that way it keeps this so it stands out a little bit. So in this case, I'm also going to write down a multiplication problem. So I'm just simply going to write 3 times 2 equals 6. And since 6 is the product, I will highlight that so that I know what a product is. All right, at this time, I want you to skip a line, and now we are going to talk about factors and multiples. So for factor, again, I skipped a line. I'm writing the word factor. I will underline it, and then I will highlight it. And a factor, those are the numbers that we multiply to get a product, okay? Or they're the number that divides evenly into another number without leaving a remainder. So I'm actually going to write a couple of definitions, so pay attention to how I've organized my page. Okay, so please go ahead and notice how I've used bullets and I indented. So I put my first bullet, and it's a number that divides into another number exactly without leaving a remainder. So for example, 6 divided by 2 equals 3. 2 is a factor of 6. For the second definition, I've written numbers that we multiply to get a product. So in this case, 3 times 2 equals 6. 3 and 2 would be our factors, so I'm going to highlight those. And that brings us to another term that coincides with that called multiples or multiple. So a multiple, and once again, I will highlight this so that it stands out. A multiple would be the products of a given number and counting number. And a lot of times people think of when you're skip counting, those are your examples of multiples. So please go ahead and copy down the definition and then put the example. And if you have to go down to the next line to fit them in, that's fine. But for instance, the multiples of 5 would be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. So it's the skip counting. And at this point here, we are now going to move on to a little bit more with division. And so for a dividend, I'm going to write the word dividend here as we prepare. Keep making sure that you are writing neatly. Be sure that you are spelling words correctly. Make sure that you are putting spacing between words because your notes don't do you any good if you can't read them. So the dividend and a division problem is the number that is being divided. The number being divided. So copy that down. So in this case, if I have 24 divided by 3 equals 8, the number that is being divided up is 24. So 24 is known as our dividend. Then we have another number which is known as the divisor. So the divisor is the number that divides the dividend? So can anybody think of, so again, pause it maybe here. Can you think of which number up above would be the divisor? So the number that divides the dividend. I need to highlight divisor. And if you guessed that 3 would be the divisor, you are correct. 24 divided by 3 equals 8. So 3 is the number that is dividing up 24. So that is known as our divisor. Now at this point here, I am almost to the end of my paper, so I'm not going to try and cram anything in here. I also don't need a new heading because this continues. So I'm just going to move over right next door because remember I asked you to make sure that you had started on the left-hand side. And now I am going to write another term, and I'm starting on the very top line here, not the title line, but this line right here, and I'm right up against this pink line, and I'm going to write the word quotient. So I want you to think to yourself if you know what the word quotient means. All right, if you guessed that it is the answer to a division problem, then you are correct. All right, so if we continue with our problem of 24 divided by 3 equals 8, 8 would be the quotient because that is the answer to the division problem. All right, at this time, I would like you to go ahead and copy down this division problem and copy it down as you see here. So we call this the division bracket, and people will write that differently. But I wrote 42 divided by 3, and the answer is 14. And I didn't show all the work because that's not important right now. But the dividend, because one way that you can kind of help remember this is that it is inside. So if you think of this as a house, the dividend is inside the house. So that's this right here. The divisor is on the outside, and the divisor is dividing or splitting up our dividend. And then our quotient is the answer, or how many parts will be in each of these. So I'm basically taking 42 and I'm splitting it up into 3 parts. If I were to split 42 up into 3 parts, I would have 14 in each of those 3 parts. So 14 would be my quotient. Then I'm going to actually skip a couple of lines here just to keep my work organized. And remember, at this point, we should be starting to figure out how to organize our work, because the goal is that you eventually are able to do these types of things on your own, and you won't need us to kind of spell it all out for you. So for remainder, the remainder is simply the number that cannot be divided up evenly. So it's what's left over after the quotient. All right, at this time, go ahead and copy this down. Once again, making sure that you are keeping things lined up and making sure that you are putting spacing in between things. And so now we have remainder. And now you will be able to use this information, especially today as you learn to play the game factor and multiples. I know that some of you have been learning how to play it. There's also factor, captor. But once again, knowing those multiplication facts is really going to come in handy. So take a look at my notes, and I have a couple of pages. And then we'll just kind of keep moving backwards in our notebook. And that way, whenever you need to refer or look for a vocabulary term, we'll start finding those towards the back of our notebooks.